Marcus Williams, a 42-year-old night janitor in downtown Chicago, lives paycheck to paycheck while caring for his elderly mother with dementia. After losing his day job at a manufacturing plant, he works the graveyard shift cleaning office buildings to make ends meet. One freezing December night, Marcus encounters Elena Rodriguez, a young woman sitting alone on a park bench, clearly in distress. Despite his own struggles and exhaustion, he stops to offer her his only warm coffee and a few kind words of encouragement. This simple act of compassion sets in motion a series of unexpected events that will transform both their lives, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures create the most profound impacts. The story explores themes of human dignity, community support, and how genuine kindness can create ripple effects that change everything. The bitter Chicago wind cut through Marcus Williams' worn winter coat like a blade through paper. At 42, his shoulders had learned to hunch against more than just the cold. They carried the weight of unpaid bills, his mother's medication costs, and the constant ache of a life that seemed to shrink a little more each day. Marcus pulled his knit cap lower over his ears as he walked down Michigan Avenue at 11:30 p.m. The streetlights cast long shadows between the towering buildings, and the few people still out at this hour moved quickly, heads down, focused on getting somewhere warm. He understood that urgency. In 30 minutes, he'd clock in at the Meridian Tower, a 40-story office complex where he spent his nights mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and cleaning bathrooms that smelled of industrial disinfectant and other people's success. 6 months ago, Marcus had been a machine operator at Hammond Manufacturing on the South Side. Steady work, decent pay, health insurance that actually covered his mother's prescriptions. Then the plant closed, another casualty of cheaper labor overseas, and 200 workers found themselves competing for the same handful of jobs that paid half as much. Marcus had applied everywhere: warehouses, retail stores, restaurants. But at 42, with only a high school diploma and 20 years of factory experience, he was either overqualified or not qualified enough. The janitorial job at Meridian Tower paid $12 an hour for 8 hours, 4 nights a week. After taxes, it barely covered rent on the one-bedroom apartment he shared with his mother in Pilsen. Rose Williams, 68 years old and lost in the fog of advancing dementia, needed constant supervision. During the day, while Marcus slept, she stayed with Mrs. Chen next door, a retired nurse who charged $40 a day, money Marcus couldn't afford but couldn't do without. Tonight felt heavier than usual. Yesterday, the pharmacy had called about his mother's medication. Insurance only covered part of the cost, and the remaining $240 was due by Friday. Marcus had $73 in his checking account and 3 days to find the rest. He'd already sold his television, his father's old tools, everything of value he could live without. There wasn't much left. As he turned onto Wacker Drive, Marcus noticed her. A young woman sat alone on a park bench beside the Chicago River, barely visible in the amber glow of a nearby streetlight. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long, dark hair that hung like a curtain around her face. She wore a thin jacket inadequate for December in Chicago, and her shoulders shook. Whether from cold or crying, Marcus couldn't tell from this distance. Marcus slowed his pace. He'd learned to notice things during his nighttime walks through the city. The homeless man who slept in the doorway of the closed electronics store. The teenagers who gathered under the bridge, sharing cigarettes and stories they couldn't tell at home. The working women who walked these streets after midnight, their smiles brittle as ice. Chicago's night shift was full of people trying to survive until morning, but something about this woman was different. She wasn't moving, wasn't looking for shelter or warmth or human contact. She just sat there perfectly still, as if the world had stopped around her. Marcus checked his watch, 11:42 p.m. He had 18 minutes before his shift started, and the Meridian Tower was still 6 blocks away. Walking past would be the smart choice. Mind his own business, clock in on time, keep the job he desperately needed. That's what survival looked like at 42 with no safety net. Instead, he found himself crossing the street. Up close, he could see she was crying. Silent tears traced paths down her cheeks, and her hands, bare and red from the cold, clutched a crumpled piece of paper. She looked up as he approached, startled and wary. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, stopping several feet away to give her space. "I don't mean to bother you. Are you okay?" Elena Rodriguez looked at the stranger, who'd appeared out of the December darkness. He was middle-aged, African-American, with kind eyes and a face that showed he understood what it meant to struggle. His coat had seen better years, and he carried himself with the careful dignity of someone who'd learned to make do with less. "I'm fine," she said automatically, though her voice betrayed her. She'd been sitting on this bench for 2 hours, ever since she'd walked out of the apartment she shared with 3 other girls in Little Village, ever since she'd read the letter that changed everything. Marcus nodded but didn't leave. "It's pretty cold to be sitting outside. You waiting for someone?" Elena almost smiled at that. Waiting for someone. Yes, she supposed she was waiting. Waiting for courage she didn't have, waiting for options that didn't exist, waiting for a miracle that wasn't coming. "Not exactly," she said. Marcus glanced at his watch again. 15 minutes. But the woman's tears were still fresh, and something in her posture reminded him of his mother, in her clearer moments, when the dementia lifted just enough for her to understand what she was losing. He sat down on the other end of the bench, maintaining respectful distance. From his coat pocket he pulled out a thermos, battered stainless steel, that had belonged to his father. "I've got coffee," he offered. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." Eleanor looked at him with surprise. In Chicago, strangers didn't stop to help strangers, especially not at midnight, especially not in December, when everyone was focused on their own survival. "I don't have any money," she said. "I'm not selling it," Marcus replied gently. "I'm offering it." He unscrewed the thermos cap, which doubled as a cup, and poured the dark liquid. Steam rose in the cold air, and the smell of coffee, cheap but strong, drifted between them. Elena hesitated, then accepted the cup. The warmth spread through her frozen fingers, and she took a small sip. It was bitter, probably hours old, but it was the first kindness anyone had shown her all day. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." Marcus poured himself coffee in the thermos lid. "I'm Marcus. Elena." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two strangers sharing warmth in a city that could be brutally cold. Marcus checked his watch. 8 minutes until his shift. He should go. He needed this job. But Elena's tears had stopped, and sometimes that was enough. "Whatever's in that letter," he said quietly, nodding toward the crumpled paper in her hands. "It's not the end of the world. I know it might feel like it, but it's not." Eleanor looked down at the eviction notice. 3 days to pay $800 in back rent, or be thrown out of the only home she'd known since arriving from Mexico 2 years ago. She'd lost her job at the restaurant last week when the owner's nephew needed work. No job, no money, no family in Chicago to help. "How do you know?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Because I've been there. Different circumstances maybe, but I've been there. When you think there's no way forward, no way out, but there always is. Might not be the way you planned, might not be easy, but there's always something." Elena studied his face in the streetlight. There was no false optimism there, no cheap encouragement, just the quiet certainty of someone who'd survived his own dark nights. "I have to go to work," Marcus said, standing. "But Eleanor, tomorrow's a new day. Things look different in daylight." He left the thermos with her. "Keep it tonight, stay warm." As Marcus walked away, Elena called after him. "Why did you stop?" Marcus turned back. "My mother raised me to notice when people are hurting," he said simply, "and to help when I can." Then he was gone, swallowed by the December night, hurrying toward another building where he'd spend 8 hours cleaning up after other people's dreams. Eleanor sat alone with the thermos, still warm in her hands, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel completely hopeless. A stranger had stopped. A stranger had shared his coffee and his kindness. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe tomorrow would look different. She didn't know that across the city, Marcus was clocking in 3 minutes late, or that his supervisor would dock his pay for tardiness. She didn't know that the 24 ounces of coffee he'd given her was supposed to last him through his entire shift, or that he'd spend the next 8 hours fighting exhaustion without it. All she knew was that someone had stopped. Someone had seen her. Someone had cared. And sometimes that changes everything. Dawn was breaking over Chicago when Marcus finally made it home to the small apartment in Pilsen. His legs ached from 8 hours of mopping floors, and his head pounded from caffeine withdrawal, but he'd survived another shift. The supervisor had docked him 15 minutes pay for being late, money he couldn't afford to lose, but somehow the memory of Elena's grateful smile made it sting less. Mrs. Chen was already at his door, her weathered face creased with concern. At 73, she moved with the purposeful efficiency of someone who'd spent 40 years as a pediatric nurse. "Your mother had a difficult night," she said in accented English, handing him Rose's medication organizer. "She kept asking for you, kept saying she needed to tell you something important about your father." Marcus's chest tightened. His father had been dead for 12 years, But in his mother's fractured mind, time folded in on itself. Yesterday could be 20 years ago. A decade could pass in an afternoon. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I know it's not easy. She's a good woman, your mother. Just lost, you know? Mrs. Chen patted his arm. You're a good son, Marcus. Not many would do what you do. After Mrs. Chen left, Marcus found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, still in her nightgown, staring out the window at the morning traffic. Rose Williams had been beautiful once. He could see it in old photographs, in the elegant curve of her neck, the intelligent sparkle in her eyes. Now, at 68, she looked fragile as autumn leaves. Mama, how are you feeling? Rose turned to him, and for a moment her eyes cleared. Marcus? Oh, honey, you look tired. Have you been working all night again? These moments of clarity were becoming rarer, and Marcus treasured each one. Yeah, Mama, just got home. You hungry? I can make you some breakfast. That would be nice. She reached across the table and took his hand. Your father would be proud of you, you know, working so hard taking care of me. He always said you had his strong hands and my stubborn heart. Marcus squeezed her fingers gently. Tell me about Dad. For the next hour, Rose shared memories that came and went like radio stations fading in and out. She talked about meeting James Williams at a church dance in 1976, about their small wedding, about the day Marcus was born. Then, mid-sentence, she'd forget what she was saying and ask if he'd seen her purse, or wonder when her mother was coming to visit. By 10 a.m., Marcus had gotten his mother fed, bathed, and settled in front of the television. He'd managed 3 hours of sleep when his phone rang. Mr. Williams, this is Jennifer Morrison from Chicago Community Health Services. I'm calling about your mother's medication assistance application. Marcus sat up, instantly awake. He'd applied for the program 6 weeks ago, hoping to get help with Rose's prescription costs. Yes, I'm afraid your application has been denied. Your income is just above the threshold for assistance. I'm sorry. The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd been counting on that help, had convinced himself it would come through. Now, with the $240 due at the pharmacy tomorrow, he was completely out of options. Is there an appeals process? There is, but it typically takes 6 to 8 weeks. I wish I had better news. After hanging up, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands. He'd sold everything he could sell. He'd worked every extra shift available. He'd applied for loans that required credit he didn't have. The mathematics of poverty were simple and brutal. There wasn't enough money, and there never would be. Meanwhile, across the city in Little Village, Elena Rodriguez was discovering that kindness could echo in unexpected ways. She'd spent the night in the 24-hour laundromat on 26th Street, dozing in a plastic chair, while Marcus's thermos kept her hands warm. When morning came, she'd walked to St. Augustine's Catholic Church, where Father Miguel ran a small food pantry for the neighborhood's struggling families. Elena, mija, you look terrible, Father Miguel said when she appeared at his office door. He was a compact man in his 50s, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hands that had blessed countless troubled souls. I got evicted, Padre. I have nowhere to go. Father Miguel poured her coffee from a pot that had been brewing too long and listened while she explained about losing her job, about the 3-day notice crumpled in her pocket, about the stranger who'd shared his thermos and his hope. This man who helped you, Father Miguel said thoughtfully. Tell me about him. Eleanor described Marcus, his kind eyes, his worn coat, the way he'd sat at a respectful distance and offered help without expecting anything in return. She told the priest about his words, that tomorrow would be different, that there was always a way forward. You know, Father Miguel said, we've been looking for someone to help with our after-school program. The pay isn't much, $15 an hour, 20 hours a week, but it comes with a small apartment above the community center. Nothing fancy, but it's warm and safe. Elena stared at him. Padre, I don't understand. You have volunteers for that. We had volunteers. Mrs. Rodriguez, the other Mrs. Rodriguez, moved back to Guadalajara last month to care for her mother. We've been managing, but we need someone reliable, someone good with children. He smiled. Someone who understands what it means to need help. Elena felt tears building again, but these were different from last night's tears of desperation. When could I start? Today, if you'd like. Help me set up for the afternoon program, meet the children. We can worry about paperwork tomorrow. That afternoon, Eleanor found herself in a room full of 8-year-olds practicing English pronunciation and working on math homework. Their parents were mostly immigrants like herself, people who cleaned office buildings and worked in restaurant kitchens and sent money home to family members they might never see again. Miss Eleanor, said a little girl named Sophia, can you help me with this word problem? Elena read the problem aloud. If Marcus has $12 and spends $4 on coffee, how much money does he have left? The coincidence made her smile. Marcus, the man who'd shared his coffee, who'd reminded her that tomorrow could be different. She wondered if he knew that his simple kindness had started something, that his thermos had kept her warm long enough to find this chance. $8, Sophia announced proudly, after working through the problem. That's right, Mija. Very good. As Elena helped the children with their homework, she thought about the stranger who'd stopped on a December night. She still had his thermos, tucked safely in her backpack. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find a way to return it, to thank him properly, to tell him that he'd been right about tomorrow looking different. She didn't know that, at that very moment, Marcus was staring at his mother's medication bottles, calculating and recalculating numbers that wouldn't add up to enough. She didn't know that he was considering things he'd never thought he'd consider, pawning his father's wedding ring, missing work to take on day labor, swallowing his pride to beg from relatives who barely had enough themselves. But sometimes kindness works in mysterious ways. Sometimes a thermos shared on a cold night creates ripples that spread further than either person could imagine. And sometimes, just sometimes, those ripples find their way back to the person who cast the first stone of compassion into still water. 3 days had passed since Elena started working at St. Augustine's, and she felt like she was learning to breathe again. The small apartment above the community center was sparse. A single room with a kitchenette, a fold-out bed, and a window that overlooked the church courtyard, but it was hers. For the first time in 2 years, she had a space where she could close the door and be alone with her thoughts. The work was rewarding in ways her restaurant job had never been. These children, Sophia, Miguel, little Carmen, who still mixed up her English and Spanish, reminded Elena of herself at that age, hungry for knowledge, desperate to prove they belonged, carrying dreams too big for their small shoulders. "Miss Eleanor," Sophia asked during Thursday's tutoring session, "do you know any janitors?" Eleanor looked up from the math worksheets she was grading. "Janitors? Why do you ask, Mija?" "My mama works cleaning offices at night. She says most janitors are invisible people. Nobody sees them, nobody thanks them. But she says they keep the world clean so everyone else can do important work." Elena thought of Marcus, appearing out of the December darkness with his worn coat and kind eyes. She still carried his thermos in her backpack, had been carrying it for 3 days while working up the courage to find him and return it. "Your mama is very wise," Elena said. "Janitors do important work, very important work." That evening, after the children had gone home and the community center was quiet, Elena sat with Father Miguel in his small office. The priest was updating the church bulletin on an ancient computer, pecking at keys with 2 fingers, while wearing reading glasses that had seen better decades. "Padre," Elena said, "I want to find someone, to thank them properly, but I only know their first name and that they work nights cleaning buildings downtown." Father Miguel looked up from his typing. "The man who helped you that night? See, Marcus? He gave me his thermos and his kindness. I want to return both." The priest smiled. "Chicago is a big city, Mija. Finding one janitor among thousands. I know it seems impossible, but I keep thinking about what he said, that there's always a way forward. Maybe this is my way forward. Finding him, thanking him, showing him that his kindness mattered." Father Miguel was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he reached for his phone. "My friend Father Thomas runs a ministry downtown. They serve meals to night shift workers, security guards, janitors, cab drivers, people who work while the city sleeps. Maybe he's seen your Marcus." While Elena was making plans to search for him, Marcus was facing his darkest hour. The pharmacy had called twice about his mother's medication. The pills would run out tomorrow, and without them, Rose's condition would deteriorate rapidly. Marcus had spent 3 sleepless days exploring every option he could think of. He'd gone to the bank about a loan, denied for insufficient credit history. He'd visited 3 pawn shops with his father's wedding ring, the most valuable thing he owned, but even selling it would only cover half of what he needed. He'd called his cousin in Detroit, his aunt in Memphis, distant relatives he hadn't spoken to in years, but everyone was struggling with their own financial battles. Now he sat in the break room at Meridian Tower, staring at a job posting on the bulletin board. Day labor, construction site, $150 daily cash. The work was dangerous, unregulated, and if he got injured, he'd lose his night job too. But $150 would cover the medication with money left over. "You thinking about that construction gig?" asked Tommy Vasquez, another janitor who'd become something of a friend over the past few months. Tommy was in his 50s, had been cleaning buildings for 15 years, and understood the mathematics of survival better than most. "Might have to," Marcus said. "My mother's medications. Man, those construction crews downtown, they don't care about safety. Last month, guy fell from scaffolding on the Wells Street project, broke his back." Marcus knew Tommy was right, but what choice did he have? "My cousin works construction," Tommy continued. "Says they're always looking for night watchmen at the downtown sites. Easier work, just walk around, make sure nobody steals equipment. Pays about the same as day labor, but safer." Marcus looked up with interest. "Night work? Yeah, but here's the thing, it's 7 to 7 overnight. You'd have to choose between that job and this one." The choice was impossible. The construction job paid better, but it was temporary, maybe a few weeks, maybe less. The janitorial job was steady, but it wasn't enough to cover his mother's medical needs. Either way, he was trapped. That night, as Marcus mopped the floors of the 35th floor, he found himself thinking about the young woman he'd met 3 nights ago, Elena. He wondered if she'd found somewhere warm to sleep, if things had looked different in the daylight as he'd promised. His thermos was a small loss compared to everything else he was facing, but he hoped she'd kept it, hoped it had helped her through whatever crisis had left her crying on that bench. At midnight, during his break, Marcus stepped outside into the December air. The cold hit him immediately. He'd forgotten how much his thermos and its hot coffee usually helped during these brief respites. He walked to the small plaza beside the building, where a few food trucks sometimes parked to serve the night shift workers. Tonight, there was something different. A white van with St. Thomas Downtown Ministry painted on the side was serving hot soup and coffee to a small group of security guards and janitors. Marcus approached cautiously, unused to charity but drawn by the warmth and the smell of real food. "Evening, brother," said a cheerful man in a priest's collar, ladling soup into styrofoam containers. "Father Thomas, you work around here?" "Meridian Tower," Marcus said. "I'm Marcus." "Well, Marcus from Meridian Tower. You look like you could use some hot coffee and Sister Mary's famous chicken soup." As Marcus accepted the warm container, he noticed a young woman helping serve, dark hair pulled back, wearing a volunteer t-shirt over her jacket. Something about her profile looked familiar. Eleanor looked up from the coffee dispenser and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elena smiled, the first truly happy smile Marcus had seen from her. "Marcus, Elena." He couldn't hide his surprise. How did you... "I've been looking for you." She reached into her backpack and pulled out his thermos. "I wanted to return this and to tell you that you were right." "About what?" "About tomorrow, looking different. About there always being a way forward." Elena's eyes shone in the light from the food truck. "Your kindness that night, it changed everything for me. I found work, a place to live. I found hope." Marcus took his thermos, still warm from her hands. "I'm glad. I worried about you." "Father Miguel, my priest, he helps Father Thomas with this ministry. When I told him about you, about what you did for me, he said we should try to find you, to say thank you properly." Around them, the December night seemed less cold. Other workers gathered for soup and coffee, but Marcus and Elena stood in their own small circle of recognition and gratitude. "You don't need to thank me," Marcus said. "I didn't do anything special." "That's where you're wrong," Elena said softly. "Sometimes the smallest kindness is the most special of all." As they talked, Father Thomas watched with the satisfied smile of someone who'd spent 30 years watching small miracles unfold in unexpected ways. Neither Marcus nor Elena knew it yet, but this reunion was about to change both their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. Sometimes kindness comes full circle. Sometimes the person you help finds a way to help you back. And sometimes, just sometimes, midnight brings more than just the promise of a new day. The conversation that followed changed everything. As Father Thomas and the other volunteers packed up the ministry truck, Marcus and Elena sat on a concrete ledge outside Meridian Tower, sharing the warmth of his returned thermos and the even greater warmth of unexpected friendship. "Tell me what's wrong," Elena said gently. She could see the weight Marcus carried in the slope of his shoulders, the exhaustion that went deeper than a long night's work. So Marcus told her about his mother's dementia, about the medication that kept her stable, about the $240 he didn't have, and the choices he couldn't make. He found himself talking about things he'd never shared with anyone, the loneliness of watching his mother disappear piece by piece, the grinding poverty that made every day a calculation of what he could afford to lose. Elena listened without judgment, her heart breaking for this man who'd shown her kindness when he had so little to spare. "How much did you say? $240? For this month's prescription? But it's not just this month, Elena, it's every month. The system is broken and people like my mother fall through the cracks. Elena was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then she pulled out her phone. What are you doing? Calling Father Miguel, I have an idea. Within an hour, Elena had arranged something Marcus never could have imagined. She'd convinced Father Miguel to let her use the church's community outreach fund, money donated specifically to help families in crisis. She'd also reached out to the parents of the children she tutored, many of whom worked multiple jobs and understood what it meant to stretch every dollar. The community takes care of its own, she explained as they walked through the quiet streets toward an all-night pharmacy. You took care of me when I was a stranger. Now let us take care of you. Marcus tried to protest, but Elena was determined. You told me there was always a way forward. Sometimes that way involves accepting help from people who care. At the pharmacy, Elena paid for Rose's medication with a combination of the church fund and money collected from the St. Augustine's community, people who barely had enough themselves, but understood that kindness multiplied when shared. But Elena's plan went far deeper than 1 month's prescription. Over the next week, she worked with Father Miguel and Father Thomas to create something Chicago had never seen before, a network connecting downtown businesses with struggling families in the neighborhoods. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Companies that needed reliable night shift workers would partner with community organizations to provide not just jobs, but support systems. Marcus found himself at the center of this experiment. Meridian Tower wants to expand their janitorial services, Elena explained as they sat in Father Miguel's office the following Thursday. They're impressed with your work ethic, and they need someone to supervise the night cleaning crew for their other downtown properties. Marcus looked skeptical. I'm not management material, Elena. That's where you're wrong, said David Chen, Mrs. Chen's son and a successful businessman who joined their growing network of supporters. You understand the work, you understand the workers, and you have something most managers don't have. You know what it's like to struggle. The new position came with a 60% pay increase, health insurance that would cover his mother's medications, and flexible hours that allowed him to spend more time with Rose during her clearer moments. But the real miracle was what happened next. Elena had been working with Mrs. Chen, Marcus's neighbor, to coordinate Rose's care. What she discovered was that Mrs. Chen wasn't just helping Marcus. She was helping 6 other families in the neighborhood with elderly relatives. These informal caregivers had created their own support network, but they lacked resources and recognition. What if we formalized it? Elena asked during one of their planning meetings. What if we created a community care cooperative? Within 6 weeks, the St. Augustine Community Care Cooperative was serving 23 families in Pilsen and Little Village. Mrs. Chen became the coordinator with a modest salary funded by the participating families and grants Elena had learned to write with help from Father Miguel. The cooperative provided structured care for elderly and disabled community members, respite for family caregivers, and employment for neighbors who needed flexible work. Rose Williams became one of the cooperative's first success stories. With professional support and familiar faces, her condition stabilized. She still had bad days, but she also had good ones. Moments of clarity where she recognized Marcus, remembered his father, and smiled at the children from Elena's tutoring program who sometimes visited to practice reading with the elderly cooperative members. She's happier, Mrs. Chen observed one December evening, exactly 3 months after that night on the park bench. Having purpose, being part of something bigger than her illness, it helps. Marcus watched his mother helping little Sophia sound out words from a picture book, both of them laughing at the silly story about a cat who wanted to be a dog. How did this happen? He asked Eleanor as they stood in the cooperative's main room, watching 3 generations work together on homework and crafts. "You happened," Eleanor said simply. "One act of kindness at midnight on a cold night. Everything else grew from that." The transformation hadn't just affected Marcus and Eleanor, though. The network they'd helped create was expanding throughout Chicago. Other churches were starting similar cooperatives. Downtown businesses were discovering that investing in their workers' communities created more reliable, motivated employees. City officials were taking notice of a grassroots model that addressed unemployment, elder care, and community development simultaneously. Eleanor had been hired as the full-time coordinator for the expanding network, with a salary that allowed her to rent a real apartment and send money home to her family in Mexico. She was also taking business classes at the community college, planning to eventually start her own non-profit organization. Marcus had been promoted twice more, and was now the regional supervisor for building services at 6 downtown towers. More importantly, he'd found his calling as a mentor to other workers trying to balance family responsibilities with economic survival. "Mr. Marcus," Sophia said, tugging on his sleeve as he visited the cooperative after his shift, "my mama says you're a hero. She says you helped create all this." Marcus knelt down to Sophia's level. "You know what, Mia? Heroes aren't special people who do special things. Heroes are ordinary people who help other people when they can. Your mama is a hero too. She works hard to take care of you and helps other families through the cooperative." Sophia nodded seriously, then brightened. "Miss Elena says tomorrow we're going to visit the old people and read them stories. Will your mama be there?" "She will," Marcus said, smiling as he watched his mother carefully folding napkins with 2 other cooperative members. "She loves stories." That night, as Marcus walked home through the streets of Pilsen, he thought about the journey that had brought them all here. It had started with a simple choice: to stop and help someone who needed it, to share coffee and kindness with a stranger. Eleanor had been right when she'd called it the smallest kindness, but she'd also been right that small kindnesses were often the most special of all. At midnight on December 15th, exactly 3 months after their first meeting, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Thank you for stopping that night. Thank you for showing me that tomorrow could be different." Marcus smiled as he typed back, "Thank you for proving me right." Outside his apartment window, Chicago glittered in the darkness, a city full of people working night shifts, caring for family members, struggling to make ends meet, and sometimes, just sometimes, stopping to help a stranger in need. The golden carriage hadn't arrived at midnight in the way fairy tales promised. Instead, it had arrived in the form of community, purpose, and the radical idea that kindness, when shared, multiplies into something extraordinary. Sometimes the most profound magic is simply human beings taking care of each other.